So hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for Conversations for Equal Pay Live, a 7-part recording series to commemorate Black Women's Equal Pay Day, which fell on August 13th this year. Each show features a leader at the center of gender and race equity. Conversations for Equal Pay Live is affiliated with the Black Women's Equal Pay Day Commemoration Project, which launched on Black Women's Equal Pay Day. The recordings are broadcasted for the podcast Conversations for Equal Pay. Tune in on Spotify or visit www.conversationsforequalpay.com. I'm your host, Julene Allen, CEO of Women of Color in the Workplace, and this is my co-host and co-leader, Chief Operating Officer Jamie Gathers, also founder of Women of Color in the Workplace Atlanta. We are sitting with Teresa C. Younger, President and CEO of Miss Foundation for Women. If any of you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A window, and we will get a few of those questions towards the end. Jamie, you're on.
All right. So we're gonna jump right in here. And first, again, let me say, Ms. Younger, we're so happy to have you here and just so appreciative of your time and your experience and what you're bringing to this conversation. So thank you so much for that. Our first question is, you are president and CEO of Miss Foundation for Women. Can you tell our audience what your role entails at the foundation?
Sure. First up, I want to thank you and congratulate you both for the work that you're doing to lift up this conversation and with the success of the kickoff and everything. It's really so exciting to be able to share in this conversation with you today and to lift up the rest of the conversations you have, which all sound amazing. And I'm really looking forward to it with colleagues and friends that I really respect in the work that they are doing too. We all have a role to play. And as you said, Jamie, my role at the Ms. Foundation as its president and CEO is to really lead the foundation, to hold the vision and the voice and the culture of leading the work through philanthropy. And so through the mechanism and the sector of philanthropy, the Ms. Foundation is one of the oldest public women's foundations in the world. And my role and responsibility is to raise money, to shape conversation, to lift up and amplify the voices of women and girls, particularly women and girls of color, and to host conversation around the critical work that's going on, particularly around feminism, around the disparities and speaking our truth to what's happening and what the work is being done by women and girls of color, as well as pushing philanthropy to make sure that they are living into the truth of doing good to humankind. And so, the work that I do at the Ms. Foundation is to lead a team of about 22 women of color in challenging and making grants to the field, holding philanthropy responsible for how those grants are made, for shaping narrative discussion, and for living into the vision of creating a safe and just world where power and possibility are not limited. And that's some of the work that we're able to do there.
Wow, that's incredible. Really, really is. Wow, yeah.
It's really an amazing job. I have to tell you, I spent many years in many different areas, and I knew when I got to the Ms. Foundation that I was in the right spot. Mm-hmm. The office is located in Brooklyn, New York, on the 26th floor of a building that overlooks Manhattan. And so I see the entire east side of Manhattan. And when you walk in, our vision is written on the wall. And I knew in that moment that I was in the right place as I read the words, we believe in a safe and just world where power and possibility are not limited by race, gender, class, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, or disability. We believe that equity and the inclusion are the cornerstones of a true democracy in which the voice and value of everybody is included. And when I saw that, I knew in that moment that I was exactly where I needed to be.
That is powerful.
Thank you for that powerful, the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Mhm.
So Teresa, thank you for spearheading the Pocket Change, How Women and Girls of Color Do More with Less report. If you can share what information do you feel this report reveals about Black women, important information rather, and why is the report necessary?
Yeah. So, you know, when we started looking at how we wanted to hold philanthropy accountable, we realized that there was no baseline for the conversation. So we could say things like women and girls of color, Black women were getting less in grant dollars, but we didn't have the actual dollar amounts. And so this report, Pocket Change, How Women of Color Are Doing More with Less, actually went out and interviewed we surveyed nearly 1,000 women of color-led organizations. We interviewed 23 different philanthropic institutions that said they were funding women of color. And then we went through the database of nearly 4,000 organizations to see how they were doing it. And what we found in that report was were a number of things. But one of the things we should point out is that philanthropy is allocating $5.48 per woman of color and girl of color in this country. That's
Ridiculous.
$5.48.
I saw that. Yeah.
It's 0.5% of all philanthropic dollars in this country. And so what we were able to do in this report was really set the baseline. Like, this is, we're not even being invested in enough for 1 hour of minimum wage, for 1 gallon of gas, or to pay for 1 babysitter. And yet it is women and girls of color, particularly Black women, who have been the backbone of every social justice movement in this country since its founding. And philanthropy, you know, is just not being responsible to what it needs to do. What we found for Black women-led organizations specifically was that they were running organizations of less than $50,000, which meant in most cases, they actually were not paying themselves. And they were, in order to do the work in their communities, philanthropy was also not supporting them to pay themselves. And so, you know, here we have a continuation of the conversation that I know you all have been talking about, which is women of color, Black women, being undervalued to the point that even philanthropy was not putting value on our time to do the work to service our communities. And that in doing so, it meant that service was being provided to community and to society, but we were not being valued in that. And in the long run, we then were not able to retire or to transition money to our family or to build a savings, right? I mean, this goes on. And the nonprofit sector in this country is an economic driver. And we oftentimes don't think about it that way, but it is an economic driver. The other part of the report that I think is really important to pull out is that the organizations that we reviewed, which are symbolic of organizations across this country that are led by women and girls of color, actually were not doing single issue work. They were doing multi-issue work and using multiple strategies. And so in philanthropy, we oftentimes say, are you doing this? Or are you doing this? Are you doing racial justice, or are you doing economic justice, or are you doing reproductive justice, or are you, right? So we break it all out. And what we found and what we knew, and we all know as women who are leading organizations, we don't get to just do one thing. We don't get to just do it one way. And so what this report also lifted up was the fact that many of these organizations, almost all of them, while not only serving women and girls of color, were serving a majority women and girls of color. While not only doing reproductive justice or economic justice work, doing reproductive justice and economic justice and racial justice and voting rights work, right? Well, they were doing it all. And they were doing it in multiple strategies. So they were doing it both in their advocacy work to go up and testify at City Hall or at their state capitals, and they were doing it by changing messages, and they were doing it by providing direct service. And so, you know, the report itself, the way we look at it, was it affirmed what we knew. And fortunately, our word was not good enough because women of color are not trusted enough. And so now we have given the data for folks to use the data and to hold philanthropy responsible. How long will we only be worth 0.5% of philanthropic dollars? And the last part of the report that I think really is important is how we defined women of color-led organizations. So it's not just, do you have a woman of color leading the organization? Great, that's good. But what does the rest of the staffing structure look like? Who makes the decisions? So what does the board look like? Who are you serving in the work that you're trying to do, right? We're oftentimes told that we're being looked for a shiny unicorn, right? The woman of color, the Black woman who, you know, is so articulate and so smart and so lovely and so, right? And guess what? We are everywhere and we are doing work everywhere. And that really proved, you know, in the report itself, we found that there were women of color-led organizations in every single state in this country and the US territories. Every single state in this country and the US territories. So we need to make sure that we are investing appropriately. The report is broken down by what that investment looks like by state, as well as by region. And so the South was the lowest invested area of the country, which we can well assume, and then the Midwest. So we just need to take note of where dollars are going and what that looked like. And the report for us is the baseline, and it's completely replicable, so we can run this same exact report again with the same kind of data in a couple of years. Data point that we used was 2017. That was when we had the most data collected. So what will it look like in, you know, in a few years when we run it on 2020? And how many organizations really led by women and girls of color are actually getting the dollars that philanthropy says they're giving?
You know, this is so interesting, Teresa, because I was having a similar conversation with our new Chief Diversity Officer, who's actually here, Maybelline, the other day. And we were kind of talking about, you know, the pros and cons of a woman of color-led nonprofit versus a for-profit. And is it worth establishing a nonprofit because it's, you know, sometimes women of color suffer from obtaining funds, so their nonprofits are sustaining. So what do you think? Is it even worth, I mean, of course this work is necessary, right? But do you think it's worth these days to even invest in a nonprofit?
So I think you're asking two parts to a question. And I think one is, before we start a new nonprofit, we really need to look to see what else is happening in our communities, and do we need to have a standalone separate nonprofit? Running a nonprofit's an expensive venture. It requires an audit, it requires fundraising, it requires a lot of work. And I do believe that oftentimes women of color are uncomfortable with raising dollars and talking about money. And so I think there's one challenge to that. And so I think that's, you know, a component of it. But if you're out there doing work in your community and you want a tax protection in order to do that work, then starting a nonprofit or aligning with a nonprofit is the way to go, and allows for folks to do that. But, you know, it's not like there's, I believe in operating from a place of abundance. So I think there's, you know, we should not be looking for only one place to answer to all of the activities, issues, concerns that we're working on. You know, we never ask white men to only have one thing. We always ask women of color, who's the very best, and that's the one we want to go with, right? And so what I say is, find out where you can align before you decide to start a nonprofit. Understand what the work is around that, and make sure that when you are budgeting your nonprofit, you budget for your personal time. And you value yourself as much as the work that needs to be done in community, and use that as an opportunity to start out the work. If you are an executive director or leading a nonprofit, you're just like any other entrepreneur. You have to be creative. You have to step forward. You have to be able to knock on doors. You have to be able to sell what you are doing. You do not always, as a nonprofit, have to be bigger. You do not always need to scale up. You can stay at the size you are as long as you are servicing your community or doing the work that you are hoping to do at the level you want to do it. And so I think that, you know, having really clear vision, having a really clear mission, having really clear expectations is the way to go. But there are far more, honestly, nonprofits out there than dollars right now. Even at the Ms. Foundation, we raise every dollar that we give out. We have a small endowment, and then we raise the other $9 million that we move to the field every year. And in doing so, in times like this, where we have a significant population that is not working. So people who used to be able to give us $5 and $10 a month need those dollars now because they're unemployed, right? So how we rely on the kindness of others when you're starting a nonprofit is something you have to keep in mind, because your heart's passion can go only so far to us being able to take care of ourselves. So real self-care is not just being able to sleep at night and go for a walk. It's also being able to take care of your finances. And that's really important. And so, you know, you have to just think about what's the best solution. If you're a corporation and you go into a business and you want to start a spin-off nonprofit or a B Corp or some other version, I think that is an amazing way to go. If you're a corporation and you want to align with a number of nonprofits, or you want to move money that way, that also is an option. And so there are definitely some alignments and more creative these days than have been in the past.
I think you make a fabulous point about women valuing themselves, particularly women of color, whether they go into nonprofit or if they're starting a for-profit business. It's so important to understand that you have to sustain yourself in order to give to others. And sometimes we miss that. It's, you know, and I guess it's because we've been programmed, I guess, to believe that, you know, it's about what we have to give, not necessarily what we receive, which it is important to give, but you also have to be provided for. And sometimes, you know, people with big ideas and people who, you know, start all these initiatives and businesses, they forget about that. They don't focus on that. And it's real and it's important. Very, very good point. And actually, to that point, as you know, there is a pay gap for women, but the pay gap is wider for women of color. Unfortunately, the pay gap exists across almost every occupational sector. What can Black women do to close the pay gap?
Wow. I think we have to do what we have always done, and we have to do a little bit more. It sounds unfortunate that I'm asking us to do one more thing, but it is one more thing, which is know your value, know your worth. Be willing to ask for it. Be willing to talk about it. I say all the time to young women who are looking to start, or women in general who are looking to start nonprofits, make your budget, write in your own salary. Don't underestimate yourself, right? We have to talk about what our value is and not apologize for it. We have to be willing to get comfortable and not apologize for it, right? And so I think it's really important that we do that. The getting comfortable with money is a real conversation that we need to have. We're either making too much and we're embarrassed, or we're not making enough and we're embarrassed, right? So one of the things I think we have to do is understand, do our homework. Don't just say yes to whatever salary is offered to us. Ask for benchmarks, or do your research enough to know what the benchmarks are. We know that women of color, particularly Black women, are paid less than their male counterparts, less than our other women counterparts. So what is the number that others are getting paid? And always ask for 20% more. Negotiate. You know, you can ask for it, get comfortable enough to ask for it, and then you can negotiate where it lands in between. There are some employers, I expect people to come in and negotiate with me. May not mean I can move my budget around, but it means that I want to hear from you what your value is, what you think your value is. And it doesn't mean if I can't pay you that I don't consider you valuable, but it does mean that I can see that you're trying to position the conversation around what that looks like. So I think that's a key thing, is knowing your value, being able to negotiate for it, asking for it, and knowing when you can walk away from the table.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We are brilliant and amazing, and we sometimes think the job is more amazing than we are.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but I think we're well on our way. There isn't. Sometimes I'll tell I've told our Women of Color Network that there isn't a Black woman. I tell you, there isn't a Black woman that I don't know that isn't amazing. You know, the things that we're taking on, the challenges that we have from day to day. Unfortunately, it is like that for us right now. But yeah, we're our amazing demographic of women. All women are amazing. Mm-hmm. So overall, Black women have unique experiences socially, politically, and economically. What do you feel it takes to be a Black woman in leadership?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been thinking about this because I only know my leadership as a Black woman. So I don't know what anybody else's experience is. One of the things that I think that it takes to be a Black woman in leadership is to know yourself. Because otherwise you will be told things, or expected things, or images will be put in front of you for what others have put upon you. So the Black woman in leadership, I think you need to know yourself. I think you need to understand what your priorities and your values are in moving forward into that. And you need to recognize that your lived experiences make you the expert for what you bring to the table. And that is really, really critical. And while I define as a Black woman, I'm also have Indigenous roots and Blackfoot in my experiences. So I have multiple identities. And as a Black woman in leadership, I recognize that nobody comes with just one identity, and fully embracing and accepting the multiple identities that you have. I mean, here's a reality about being a Black woman in leadership. It requires laws on the books for us to wear our hair natural, right? We have to know who we are in order for us to be able to speak our truth and to do what we want to do. And so, that's where I find some of the imposter syndrome that presents itself being placed in front of me, that I have to work my way through. But knowing who I am, knowing what I value, allows me to step into rooms where not only where I might be the only woman of color, the only Black woman, I might still be the only woman. That, as long as I know I'm going in with some truth setting and some expertise and belief in my expertise, then I can move forward. I also think, you all know this. We have to be better. We have to be more prepared. We need to understand, and we need to understand. We need to be able to push people where we need them to go. And I think the one thing about being a Black woman in leadership is we need to feel comfortable being uncomfortable. so that we can help other people get uncomfortable and move to the next level that they need to get to also. And that's why I say know yourself, because as long as you know who you are, pushing to that level of uncomfortable so you can push everybody else there is key.
So true. That's so true. Oh, okay. I'm sitting here like, okay. Well, let's see. The next question is, we are in a critical time. There's a lot of talk about racism. One of the topics that surfaced in a Women of Color in the Workplace discussion is that Black women are often left out of these conversations since we are also affected and experience inequality differently. This is a common sentiment expressed among Black women. What are your thoughts about their grievances?
Yeah. One, they're not grievances, they're realities. And what I think is absolutely right? We are not necessarily sitting at the table. And when we are sitting at the table, we need to ask who else is there. And when we look around the table, if there is not somebody else who looks like us, in however you want that to define that, you need to ask if you can reset the table and bring somebody in with you. And you know, that is the way that we get in there. We also have to trust and build and deepen relationship with folks that are in the room and ask if you can join them, because that's really key. There are folks who came in before us, there are folks who will come after us, and when we get in the room, we cannot accept that we're the only one there. We cannot. And we cannot sit at the back seat. We have to sit at the table. You know, it's, you know, Shirley Chisholm's quote that, if you don't have a seat at the table, bring your folding chair. I oftentimes say, if there's not enough room at the table, ask everybody to scoot over. If everybody's scooted over and there's still not enough room, ask everybody to slide back so they create a bigger table. And all in all, we can ask to reset the room. We can ask to go into another room that doesn't have a table. We limit ourselves to the constraints of white supremacy and patriarchy when we only play at the tables that are given to us, and we must set the tables. And so when I hear about the realities of my sisters in this work and in the work they are trying to do and in the sectors that they are trying to do it, I think there are a couple of things we need to do. We need to talk about it. We need to acknowledge that this is our lived experiences is a real experience, and it's not just happening to us. We need to organize with your other colleagues in the workspace, and then you need to come together. As we were talking earlier about the convention, and when I see a sister doing work, what I say is, I've got your back before I critique, right? I've got your back and I will show up. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, when people go into a room, what do you need? Do you need me in the room? Can I bring you into the room? What does that look like, so that we're not just doing it by ourselves? And to knock on the door when the door is closed. Because there are times, and I heard this yesterday in a call that I was on, where people are still oblivious to the fact that they are missing our voices at the table. And sometimes we have to knock on the door and say, hey, we're here. We have a voice, we have a position, we have some expertise, we have experiences, and we're really good at what we're doing, and here we are.
I think that's spot on, because so many women, especially women of color, when we do get a seat at the table, we're so happy to have a seat at the table, we forget to use our voice while we're sitting there. And sometimes we even forget to leave the door cracked so someone else can come in with us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so important.
So it reminds me of Tamron Hall. She had said something recently. She used to believe that if she put her head down and just work hard, that, things will pay off. And that's part of it. But she said sometimes, not sometimes, but when you see a sliver of the door opening, you have to push it in. And I love that she said that because, yeah, it does take that level of assertiveness and saying, hey, I'm here. This table I belong here as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's, I mean, it's the best example, right? I oftentimes say, you know, we stand in the shade of trees that we did not plant, and we walk down paths that we did not pave, and we drink from wells that we did not drill. And yet, as we move forward, we must water those trees, repave those paths, and redig those wells for the next generation. So we have to leave the door open. We have to continue to push forward. And even when the path doesn't seem clear, we need to keep going forward. And that is the work that we need to do. Push the door open, pull somebody alongside us, acknowledge there are those that came before us, and appreciate those who will come behind us.
Excellently put. So before I ask the last question, if you guys have any questions, you can type it in the type box, in the chat, the Q&A window, and then we'll get to those questions right after this last question. So Teresa, if you can offer advice to your younger self, what would that be?
I love this question so much. So one of the things you should know is I'm a little Black girl who grew up as an Air Force brat in North Dakota. I was as dark a person as I had ever met, and for many, many years. And I would tell my younger self that I am enough. I think I continually questioned beauty as it responded to white America, and what that looked like, and whether my voice was valuable enough. And I think I would say I am enough. I also grew up a Girl Scout, and so making the world a better place is part of who I am, and that value is enough. That commitment is enough. And in caring for myself, I care for the world, and that's the role that I need to take on. And so I think I wish somebody had said that. I always strive for more and more and more, which I think is really important. But at some point, you have to stop and say, "You're amazing, and you're enough."
Absolutely. So Maybelline said, agreed 100% on opening the door, especially with that small sliver of opening. I like visualizing the elevator where I jumped in and moved up or down with people who are stakeholders of influence. Once I get on the elevator, I'm sharing my experience and voice. I love that, Maybelline.
I love that. I'm going to remember that. Thank you so much. The elevator. I love the elevator because it creates room for everybody to get on, right? You don't have to close the doors so fast. I love that that visualization. Thank you.
So Ashley asks, with the limited funding that women of color led and women of color focused organizations receive, what advice would you give to women of color in the nonprofit sector right now?
Yeah, one of the key parts of the report that we found was that philanthropy itself does not always tell people that it's giving money to women and girls of color. They are not naming it. And so one of the things I would say is apply even if you do not think there's all the alignment that's out there. And call foundations and ask if you can speak to a program officer. I find that the more I know what's happening on the ground, even if the Ms. Foundation cannot fund that organization, I might be talking with other foundations that can, right? So, get involved in your local communities, in your local nonprofit sector, and in the local community foundations, but also take a look at all the places you're doing your work, and really think as broadly as you can about that. We will see some more money moving to women and girls of color. We will. We cannot accept the $5.48 that's going there now. So there will be more money moving to women and girls of color over time. Being really honest about what your budget is really, really important. And I would say keep asking, keep asking. And if there is not enough support, ask again and again and again. I know that sounds really not.
That was great. That was excellent advice. And what I'm getting is that we have to continue using our voices, and we have to ask. You know, we may get a no, but it feels so powerful when we do get a yes.
And there will be more no's than yeses, unfortunately. In this country, we still do not trust Black women to do the work that needs to get done. But we need to keep showing up so that they can see us and continually see us in the leadership roles that we're trying to take on and in the ways we're trying to service our communities. And I will say, we are getting seen more and more. 6 years ago, when I started at the Ms. Foundation, we weren't even acknowledging women and girls of color, let alone Black women's leadership. We weren't even say that in philanthropy. And we are saying it, we are naming it, we are tracking it, and we need to increase it, right? We need to do all those things. So for those who are in the field, who are doing this work, keep doing it. And my hope is that we will continue to see all of the work that's being done. We as a country need all of the work that's being done. And it's been led by us, it will continue to be led by us, and it's really important.
That's awesome. Okay, so our next question comes from Shara, and her question is, how do you engage women of color who do not reach back and open a door, but say that they do?
How do we hold each other accountable to what we're trying to the work we say we're trying to do? I think there's a couple of things. One is the call in, and I think we need to trust each other, and we need to show up for each other. And so, and yet we need to recognize that it is not incumbent on us to run ourselves into the ground in order to make that happen. So I think we need to trust each other in what we are doing, and to know that there is no one way that needs to get it all done. That there should be as many paths as we can take to ending gender and racial inequity, to servicing our communities, and to lifting up our voices. And so one of the things I say is you can ask somebody how they are doing the work they say they are doing. You don't have to agree with how they are doing it, but we should not be looking to tear them down in the process. Sometimes silence is more powerful than tearing something down. Particularly when we know our sisters are out there trying to do the best they can do, and we don't know their whole stories sometimes in the work they're trying to do. So I say we can try to hold them accountable. We can ask the question. We can deepen relationship with them, and then we can decide whether we want to hold that relationship with them. But I think you have to ask the question. Go right to people and ask the question. You don't have to agree with the answer. But you can't be speculating if you don't even ask the question directly. And, I say all the time, you can ask the question. I may be able to answer it. I may not be able to answer it. I am going to try and create space, but if I can't, I can't, right? But I believe my role at the Ms. Foundation and the role of the Ms. Foundation is as often as possible to bring folks along and to bring folks along, not as us as the leader, but to bring folks along with them as their expertise and put those voices out there.
Yeah, I think it's spot on to come from a place of curiosity and understanding that we're wearing so many hats. So, you never know what a woman of color is working on, how many initiatives she's working on, how many side hustles she may have, you know, what her commitments are. So coming from a place of curiosity is always best. Absolutely great answer. Our next question comes from Maybelline, and she said, do you have any initiatives that you are currently working on that you would like this community to support you on, excuse me?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Maybelline. I would say there's a couple of things that we're doing at the foundation right now that I think is pretty critical. We have, first off, we have a She Core initiative, which helps support the general operating of women of color, particularly women of color-led organizations around safety, health, and economic justice. We recognize that that work is completely intertwined. And one of the things that an organization like the Ms. Foundation is able to do is we've already done the research on the organizations, so you don't have to. So by giving to Ms., you're able to give to those organizations as a pass-through to make sure it gets to the grassroots. There's a couple of projects that we are specifically working on and that are out there right now. One, we have a Girls Fund initiative, which is actually funding girls of color and girl of color-led organizations here in the United States. There's also an organization called Grantmakers for Girls of Color, which is funding girl of color-led organizations doing a variety of work also. We have a fund also at the foundation called the Activist Collaboration Fund, which is to support individual organizations who are looking to collaborate to do healing justice work, to figure out how to function in this space in the most effective way given COVID-19. That is another area that we have. And then if you go to our website, we have a whole listing of the organizations we're currently funding. I believe the last round of organizations we funded in the past. At the Ms. Foundation, the way we fund is that we provide general operating support, not project support. So we believe that if you can't turn the lights on and you can't pay your staff, then you can't get the work done. And so we trust the women who are leading these organizations to do with the money as they need to and get the work done. And we also try to provide multi-year gifts. So they're not huge, but we, as often as we can, we try to make a grant that's at least 2 years. But since we raise the money that we give away, we don't want to overpromise into a space that's not going to get us to where we want to go. And we also recognize that social change takes time. So as often as possible, don't look to fund something for a day or a year. Look to fund something for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Really stay with an organization and help stabilize the organization's baseline so that they can actually function and then get to dream into the work that they want to do and not get locked up. So those are some of the top line. I mean, I encourage people to feel free to go to forwomen.org, which is our website for the Ms. Foundation. You can find the Pocket Change report there. You can also find a whole bunch of information, and you can also reach out to me directly if you have any questions or thoughts or ideas or partnerships, or even want to share about an organization, because we collect that information and we are beginning to expand our work more specifically in the South. And under our strategic plan, our work is specifically targeted at supporting women and girls of color. It doesn't mean that we're not supporting all women and girls. It just means that we need to start somewhere.